Hello and welcome. We are Très Doulx, a Renaissance flute consort. During this COVID-19 pandemic, we find ourselves unable to do the live performances and presentations that we love to do. So we've prepared this video consisting of 4 video performances that we recorded before the pandemic and a series of Zoom conversations about what it is that we do and how we go about it. We're often asked why we have the name Très Doulx. And I'd have to say that naming groups is often a very interesting and challenging thing to do. And if you ask a lot of groups how they got their names, you might come up with some pretty interesting answers. For example, one group that I played in was actually named after a refrigerator that was in the room that we rehearsed in. We couldn't come up with anything else. Our name came about, maybe not quite so strangely, but one of our first public performances, we needed a printed program and we didn't really have a name. We called ourselves the Boston Renaissance Flute Consort. And after the performance, my wife, Jane, said, "That's really a boring name." And she opened the program and said, "Here, how about Très Doulx?" And it happens to come from a piece by Binchois that we played in that program, setting of an anonymous poem, Les très doux yeux de vie, madame, the most beautiful eyes in my lady's face. And that's how we got that name. We all came together through a common connection at Boston University. Rachel is completing her PhD in musicology at BU. Nama received a doctorate in historical performance at BU. Laura is finishing her doctorate in historical performance at BU, and I'm on the faculty at BU in the historical performance department.
We're all dedicated to historical performance, as Chris mentioned, and play a variety of instruments. For this particular ensemble, we play Renaissance flutes. They are pitched at 408, so slightly lower than what we would hear today on most modern instruments. And we also play as much as possible from original sources, which means we try to play from the scores of music from the time from when it was written. We'll be getting into this all a little bit more later.
The flute consort is made up of 3 tenor-sized flutes and 1 bass flute. The tenor size are made to be played in different ranges. So some flutes are made to be played in the tenor range and some of them in the higher ranges. When the music goes really high, we sometimes use the treble flute, which is a little flute. We play both instrumental music that was written specifically for instruments, and most of our repertoire actually is borrowed from vocal music.
So all of the music that we're going to present for you today is, as Nama said, borrowed from vocal music across a variety of genres, both sacred and secular. And performances in today's presentation are performed from a single musical source that was copied in Mexico, not in Europe, and relatively late given the time period that our repertoire comes from. It was copied in the later part of the 17th century, even though the music comes from the 16th century, and in one case, even the late 15th century. And the 4 pieces come from a variety of genres, even though they're all vocal. So the first piece we'll play for you is a motet, Dulcísima María, by Francisco Guerrero, one of the most famous Spanish composers of the late Renaissance. But here it's presented without its text, or with just enough text to identify the piece. And that's something that we see consistently across this musical source. Yes, it's vocal music, but in this source, it doesn't have its text, which is a pretty good clue that this book was prepared for use by instrumental musicians as opposed to singers. We also know that this particular book was prepared for a church context. It was used for instrumentalists playing in church. So here we have historical instrumental players drawing on vocal genres that are both sacred and secular, and doing so within a church context. So that's kind of what we're exploring with this program, and we'll give you 4 selections drawn from that program today, beginning with Guerrero's Dulcísima María.
Thank you.
as we mentioned earlier, we play from original source notation. And what we mean by that is we don't play from what most people consider a modern edition. So modern editions are created by somebody, usually a musician familiar with the music, that put into a score format, typically with parts. And this music would be arranged with bar lines and things familiar to us, familiar to those of us that have been born in this time and used to this way of visually seeing music. So the sources we play from were actually the copies or the original manuscripts that were written out by scribes or the original composer. So this presents a whole set of both positive, amazing things that we've found, like that illuminate the music to new possibilities and also challenges. I will just say that one of the things we have discovered is that these sources contain all the information that is needed for performers. And here's an example. As you can see, from a kind of modern perspective, then maybe the gut reaction would be there's not enough information present. We're missing, as I mentioned, bar lines, some musical directions. But this has been a wonderful, exciting process for us to just explore these pieces without these things that we typically see today.
As Laura mentioned, there are no bar lines. And what that gives to us is a complete freedom from the rhythmic structures that bar lines imply. That is to say, some weight on the downbeat, some arrival on the downbeat. And once we started playing from this notation, we realized that those things were totally anachronistic and were not part of this music at all. And at that point, the counterpoint became much more vivid to us and much more understandable. The problem it presents is that of rehearsal for us, in that we have to look for some kinds of structures, and we have to look for cadences because they could be anywhere, and they're formed primarily by the counterpoint, not by the structures that we're used to in more tonal music. So we start to rehearse and find that we suddenly have no idea where we are. We have to find cadences. We have to go through these structures really painstakingly. It takes quite a bit of time. But the result is that we understand the structures of the music and the segments of music and the overall architecture much better than we would if it were easy for us to play. You might also notice that the rhythmic notation is quite different too, and we have to deal with that. In addition, we have to play in 7 different clefs and transpose. That all takes a fair amount of mental effort for us, but we're happy to do it. I think we all like puzzles. And however, we find that after about an hour and a half, we're mentally shot. So we not only spend a lot of time learning pieces, but we take a lot of breaks.
Through that, we've discovered some really amazing coffee and baked goods by Nama's son.
This rehearsal method also pulls into focus the reliance on listening rather than reading or sight. That is very much a part of performance from sources of this format. And for us, or at least I'll speak for myself, that comes as something of a surprise and an adjustment. For those of us who grow up in the reading what, as Laura mentioned, we would call modern score notation, there's a certain privilege given to the information that you can see, that you can glean by reading a score. And that's not something that it's possible to do in either a part book or a choir book format, which are the 2 formats that we read from when we use original sources from this period. But again, we don't see that as a deficiency so much as an opportunity to get to know the repertoire in as close a way as possible to the way performers, singers, or instrumentalists of the 16th century would have come to know their repertoire, which again is through sound and not through sight.
One of the things that I was astonished by when we started looking at this music and what we know about how people approached it was the fact that 16th century musicians could improvise this kind of intricate counterpoint. And we do find that being dependent on listening and understanding this music in a different way, we understand as a result, the improvisatory character of even the written music.
The music that we are playing for you in this video is coming from the Puebla manuscript, which is in a choir book format. In this format, you have one big score that everybody is reading from, and it's arranged in a set way. So on the left side of the page, you would find the superius and the tenor. On the right side of the page, you will find the altus and the bass. And that's the way the whole book is arranged. For us, it's sometimes a challenge to play in this format. Although we still play from the original source, we sort of divide the choir book into two, and each pair of us is reading from the same page.
I think it's interesting to think about what it takes for four people to read from one choir book in probably a dimly lit church. It's very hard for us, and I think that also has a lot to do with the idea that people really understood this music and could improvise it. It's quite possible that some of these performances contain as much improvisation as actually written music.
I'll add that most of our sources come from, most of them have been digitized. So we have these beautiful copies that have been put in digital form that, because of our access to modern technology, we can easily split and divide, as Nama mentioned. We still try to keep as much as possible to sharing the same music and getting the sense of what it would be like to play off from a choir book format, even though we do split it up. So we do try to share, at least keep pairs together and kind of go from there. We have attempted a couple of times to all play from one stand, essentially, but as you noticed in the video, our instruments are rather large, and so this also speaks to the fact that this music as vocal music has a almost different effect even in performance than it does when it's put on instruments, which, as Chris mentioned, makes us wonder, were these instrumentalists so well versed in this music that they could easily improvise? How would they have managed to all play from the same book?
I would just add that the irony is not lost on us that we often play these things from our iPads.
Yes.
The next selection that we're going to present for you once again comes from this minstrel book, or book of music for instrumentalists, that was copied in Puebla, Mexico, quite late actually, in the second half of the 17th century, even though virtually all of the music that it contains is from earlier in the 16th century. And the next piece we're going to play for you, Por do Comenzaré, which is by Pedro Guerrero, the older and less famous brother to Francisco Guerrero, is once again a piece with a vocal origin. It has a text, a very doleful, tragic text about love lost, and it's secular. And one of the characteristic features of this collection of music is that it contains both vocal music from the secular repertory and the sacred repertory, but in both cases presented without its text, or with only enough text to identify the piece. So, and we know that this book was copied for use by instrumentalists in a church context. So it leaves open many questions about what associations this music had with their texts when performed without their texts in a church context. So we hope you enjoy this next performance of Por do Comenzaré by Pedro Guerrero.
And now we have a special guest with us, Martin Wenner, prominent maker of historical flutes and recorders, has agreed to join us from his workshop in Singen, Germany, to talk about his work and the consort that he made for us that we're playing on all of these recordings. Welcome, Martin, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I guess the one question I have is how you got into this business. And I realized from previous conversations that you originally started out making modern flutes. Is that right?
That's true. Basically I was playing flute and recorder, and when I was around 14, I fell in love with a wooden flute which I bought from a flea market, and I was so enthusiastic that I played hours on that instrument. So after several days, the instrument was completely ruined, so I had to replace it. And this was the start of my career as a flute maker, because then I wanted to start making flutes. And when I applied for apprenticeship, there was nobody who taught to make wooden flutes. So the only chance was to learn making recorders and modern flutes, silver flutes, which I did then.
So there are many models for Baroque flute, for Renaissance flute. I'm curious, how do you decide which one to make, which one to do next, which one? How did you get to explore the one that you've already made? How do you decide on that?
also that is a long story. I tried to when I started making flutes, the museums were open in Europe, and like you could go there and play these instruments and measure them. So I did a lot of research, and I had a big list when I started, all the models, Denner and Quantz and Bresson and all the names, famous names, not as famous names, and I made them all. But with time, I noticed also that it is not good to make so many things. It's better to make just a small selection, but then better. And so I decided, of course, about the selling point, which instrument were favored by the musicians. And the other one was which instruments fit into a pattern that we can cover Italian music, French music, German music. So, and I still try to keep, if I say product line, the product line as small as possible, because in the end it is also like playing the instrument. It is also important to know the instrument you're making. Otherwise you can't reproduce the character of the instrument. Do you understand? If you have, if you make one day a flute after Denner and the next day a Grenze, it is very unlikely that you really follow the ideas of the original maker, which is important, I think.
That gets to the idea of what it's like to actually make a copy of the instrument, or to decide that you understand the characteristics of the instrument and make adjustments to achieve what you believe to be the characteristics of the original, rather than the exact dimensions or the exact patterns of it.
Correct. That is like playing music. You reproduce something. And you have to analyze what is the idea behind it. So you analyze maybe a sonata, you have the music in front of you, and then you try to understand what the composer wanted. And the same is with musical instruments, of course. And if you talk about a Grenze flute, there are hundreds of Grenze flutes, originals. So which one to copy? Isn't it better to think what Grenze actually wanted in his models? Isn't that better? So I try that. And also then in these borderlines, I have the freedom also to change things.
That's really, it hits upon the sort of the state of the early music movement, which I think began, as maybe makers began, doing exact copies and trying to reproduce what somebody might have heard. But gradually now we use this to understand the music, understand the instruments, and produce something that's really much, in some ways, much more authentic than it used to be.
Yes, and it is not possible to copy everything. Even you have the exact measurements. First thing is, it is difficult to reproduce it one-to-one exactly. The second is, the instruments have changed over time. And the third is also, what does a musician nowadays want? And these things have to come together in sort of a product, which then a tool, I would say, a tool which makes the musician happy as well.
When you were developing your pattern that you now use for your Renaissance flute consort.
Mm-hmm.
What models and what original models or other decisions were you faced with or drawing upon when you were coming up with your pattern?
I was completely confused because I went to museums and saw many instruments. So there were instruments by Claude Raffi, French instruments with a very wide bore. Then there were very narrowed bored instruments. It was a complete disaster. Some instruments I could play, I was able to play, and I didn't understand anything. And then I decided that can't go on like that. And I had also discussions with Rudi Tutz about it, and he said, I write on my workshop door, Rudi Tutz, flute maker, in brackets, no Renaissance flutes. because it is a complete new topic. You come from a later instrument and then go a step forward in time. But I had here around the corner in Zurich, I'm not living so far from Zurich and Basel. So I was in contact with Anne Smith, you probably know.
Yes.
And she was very enthusiastic and helped me a lot.
So you do make adjustments inside the bore. It's not entirely.
Yes.
You make adjustments as you make the flute, I assume.
Yes, correct.
Interesting.
May I talk a little bit about the construction of the flute?
Yes.
Please do.
You know, it looks like a stick, and it's very simple. It is outside, it's not cylindrical, you know. Inside, it is cylindrical, normally. So the diameter at the top end and at the bottom end should be more or less the same. The flute is conical from the embouchure hole down to the bottom. So the taper is going down and about 2 millimeters or something. And also at the head joint, there is a taper, which is acoustically not important. But of course, here it is important because the wall thickness changes. And then you can, what we did was trying every point in the instrument, which it's to check which role it has. So maybe you know that, or you tried it yourself, if you take a little wire and at the end a little bobble, you say bobble, or a piece of cork or something, and you go inside the bore and you move it upwards and you play at the same time, the sound of the instrument changes and the pitch is flatter. For instance, here at the end, if you, with this little fish, I call it, at this point, it's flatter and it's getting flatter here at the embouchure. That is in the first octave. But if you go to the second octave, you have already more places where the pitch is becoming lower if you go inside with this fish. Does everybody understand the system?
I think so, yeah.
So the theory then is, and which works, if you do exactly the opposite, so take wood away, you have the opposite effect.
Interesting, yeah.
And if you find the right places, and I won't tell you where, then you can really tune the instrument inside. You don't see anything at the outside. It changes the overtone spectrum for specific notes. And then you have to decide, or we had to decide, which notes are important and which are not important. And that is always the same problem with Baroque flutes as well. But it is possible then to decide that and make little changes, not massive ones, but little ones.
Is this the same process that you use when you're voicing the 3 tenors and a consort that play in different ranges?
The function of instruments within a concert is a different one. You have the bass, and then you have 3 tenor flutes which look the same, but they can't be the same because I was not able to make up to now an instrument which works fantastic from the bottom up to the top. I don't know why, but it's not, in my opinion, it's not possible. So it's, call it lazy, but maybe it's the most easiest way to decide which instrument works best, takes the top, and the instrument which works best in the at the bottom goes and takes the third line. With time, I found out that the weight of the instrument is very important, that the lighter weight instruments are better at the top and the heavier instruments are better at the bottom. And I also construct the instruments differently. So I take instruments with a thinner wall and which are lighter than up to the top. So to do the superior, that should be the thinnest and the lightest of all the 3 instruments.
So do you see any similarity in, you tried many Renaissance flutes, so do you see that they use similar processes? They're sometimes carving the bore from the inside to make the tuning better, or what did you see in the original that taught you how to make these adjustments, or is it mostly from a scientific point of view that you knew from talking to acoustician?
Yeah, I think it is mostly a solution I found or I'm doing. I have also colleagues who don't do that. I was talking, of course, to my colleagues a lot about this, and I have seen these corrections on several instruments, but not, unfortunately, not on all of them. So if you want to see the workshop, then I think I need to go on another device because it is difficult to carry around the laptop. So here we are. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, there are some Renaissance flutes which are in process. And some palanca flutes. And a bottle of wine.
I see. I was going to comment on that.
This will become a bottom part, a right-hand joint of a Granzer flute, more keyed. For instance, we start next week some Renaissance flutes, and they are still very thick, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
Too thick. But the inside bore is already, the center bore is already in it. And then in the next step, we will, on that lathe, make them thinner. And here we are. So this is where everything starts. So you see boxwood trees.
Mm-hmm.
And we store them as complete trunks. And also here, that's all full of boxwood. It's very heavy stuff. So this boxwood you see there is about 3 tons of boxwood.
Mm.
So here we are back.
So maybe one more question, if I may. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite part of making flutes? Is any of the stages that you like better than others, or that you enjoy more than the others?
Difficult to say, because sometimes I do very rough stuff like cutting trees. And on the other side, I'm doing embouchures with the preciseness of hundredths of a millimeter to
Yes.
get everything out. So what I most enjoy, to answer your question, is actually the mixture of all that. So on one side being scientist to look at things, and on the other side or to make it round or to drill it, which is very to do the center bore, it's very, very noisy, and in the evening I sleep immediately. Or then concentration work. This is all what I really love, this combination of everything. That makes my job and my, as a flute maker, really what I always wanted to be. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that was a fabulous journey into your workshop, and it's really wonderful to see all the aspects of it. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's quite wonderful. Well, Martin, we want to thank you so much for taking this time to give us this absolutely fascinating conversation, and telling us an awful lot about instruments that we need to know and perhaps didn't. I'm particularly moved by, in a way, the similarities between the actual making of instruments and understanding them, and the making of music and understanding them, and it's no different. And it's a wonderful partnership that we have, and we thank you also for making such a wonderful consort for us.
Of course, I thank you very much for this talk as well, and I'm very it makes me very happy that you use the concert I have made, my concert.
Yes, yes.
The flutes I have made for you, and that gives me a lot of happiness in my life, that I know that the things I'm making are in the end used, and they spread fun and joy to other people. Yeah.
Thank you again, Martin, for a wonderful interview. We're going to play one more piece for you now, and this is the Pangiolingua by Frede. And this piece was very, very popular. It is the earliest piece in the manuscript, in the Puebla manuscript, but we find it in more than 30 other sources, which attests to its popularity. The piece is based on the Spanish version of Pangelingua, and here it is in Freire's setting for played on a flute consort. So all of the music examples that we had in this video are from the Puebla manuscript, but we do have some other programs in planning. One of them includes the madrigals by de Rohrer, which exist in two formats, really. One is in part book, where each of us get their own part to play from. And the other one is in a score format, which was put together for people to study counterpoint and also for instrumentalists to play these madrigals. So we know the pieces were performed on instruments as well.
Another program we are preparing right now explores the music around the courts of Margaret of Austria and Mary of Hungary, who were two incredibly powerful female rulers and female members of the Habsburg Burgundian dynasty. They were aunt and niece and served respectively in sort of two different parts, the earlier and the middle part of the 16th century, as governess of the Netherlands. And in both cases, it was their status as a widow that allowed them to hold such a powerful role. And this program looks at the music that survives from the orbit of their courts, and really gets into a little bit of the biography of these two incredibly powerful female rulers who played an important part in international politics in the dominant Habsburg family of that time.
We have one more piece for you today. It is from the Puebla manuscript, and it is anonymous in our source. We really love this piece because it's very fun to play, and it's often been a favorite of our audiences every time we performed it. And we think one of those reasons is that it has some changes in meter and different textures. So we hope that you enjoy it, and we would love to hear from you and hear your feedback on all this music and what you think.
Thanks so much for watching our video. We hope you enjoyed it. For more information or any questions you may have, please contact us through the information displayed on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you too to the Society for Historically Informed Performance. We are delighted to be able to partake in this season, and we wish we could have performed live, but we're so thankful to have this outlet. And we know it's a lot of work to put something like this together. So thank you so much for providing this opportunity. We are actually going to be available for a meet and greet immediately following the premiere of this video. The link for the Zoom meeting is going to be available on SoHIP's Facebook page or their website. Please feel free to come join us and ask any questions that you might have about these pieces or the flutes or what our favorite coffee is. And we look forward to seeing you there.
We also look forward to seeing you live soon.